So in today's session, what we are going to cover is we're going to cover the data types and operators. And primarily in this, we will be covering how do we write program syntax in Python, how do we comment part of the code in syntax. That is also very important. How we will see what variables are and what are the different data types that Python supports. And then we are going to also look at what are different data types. How do we do data type casting? We will see what is data type casting, and then we will see how do we do data type casting. Then we also have to cover today what are the different operators, right? What are arithmetic operators, what are assignment operators, what are comparison operators and logical operators, and then bitwise operators, and then we will cover what an operator precedence is. So for this today, like I said, for some of the classes, I'll be using Spider. For some of the classes, I'll be using Jupyter Notebook. So today I'm going to use Jupyter Notebook, and that is what we will be doing today. So let me get started with you guys, the data types and operators. So let me name it data types and operators.
Manish, can you zoom it out?
Yeah, sure, I can. Is this good?
Yeah, much better. Yeah, much better.
Good now?
Yeah, it's better now.
Sure, perfect. Okay, all right. So these were the two lines of code that we saw yesterday. These were our first lines of code, right? How do we print something in Python? There's a function named print, and you can just inside the parenthesis and inside double quotes specify what is it that you want to print. So what we are going to do is we are going to extend this further and see what all things are possible using the print function. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm just going to add a few lines of code here. How do we do that? We can just click on plus icon to insert new cell, and that is going to add a new cell after the cell in which your cursor is right now. So my cursor is in this cell right now. If I click on plus, it adds a new cell after this, right? And that cell becomes the active cell. If you have extra cells that you want to delete, you can always delete it from here, right? So what is it that we can do from here, right? So let's write after a couple of spaces print and test. How can I execute this cell? I can click on here and you see it is working fine, right? It is working fine. So what has happened, right? What is it that I'm trying to do differently? What I'm trying to do differently is I was not specifying any spaces in here in my first two lines of code, but then right now I have specified a few spaces, right? And I'm seeing that that is also not giving me any problem. It is working fine, right? So what does it mean? Does it mean that in any line I can start writing from anywhere, or I need to start from zeroth index? So ideally, I should not be writing my code like this. Even if it works, it is not a good programming practice. This is something called as indentation, and indentation means that you are specifying either a tab character or a few spaces and then writing the line of code. If you write, you can also if you write it like this, you can also run the code and it is not going to give you any error. But then this is not a good programming practice. You should always start writing your code from the leftmost side on any cell or any line if you're using Spider, and that is how you should be. Now, it does not necessarily mean that we do not use indentation at all. We will use a tab character to separate or to make our code more structured and more readable, and that is when we are going to use the for loop, right? And I'm just going to, I know I've not covered for loop, but then I just need to show you quickly what I mean and where we will actually be using the indentation, right? So right now this statement is working, but let's say if I write for I in 0 to 5, and if I say print I, then what happened here? It is giving me an invalid syntax. And why is that so? it is giving me an invalid syntax because I did not write the syntax correctly. But then right now, when I corrected the syntax, my print statement is not executing, right? It is saying expected an indented block. Now, what does it mean? It means that my this print statement is not going to work unless and until I specify an indent here, right? So what do I need to do to specify an indent? On my when my cursor is on the leftmost side, I can just press tab on my keyboard and that will create an indent for me, right? So if I now run the code, you will see that this code is executing correctly, right? There is no error, and what is happening is for whatever number of values you have in this braces, right? This print statement executing that many times, right? So my print statement is first executing for this value 0, and it is printing 0, print I, print 0. And for the second time, it is running for this second value, which is 5, and this is printing 5, right? So here, as such, there is no need for me to do any indentation, but then here it was required, right? And that is what I wanted to show you guys. So for now, what I'm doing is I'm just removing this indentation from here. This is not required. But then uh, in case of loops, or in case of statements like if else, we will need to, or while, right? We will need to use indentation going forward. So guys, do not think that I've covered for loop. This was just an example for me to show you where exactly we will be required to use indentation. We are going to cover for loop in detail for sure, right? So this is how basically we write the code, right, in Python. All the lines will actually start from the leftmost side, but in cases of loops or when we are defining functions, we will need to actually indent it uh, based on how we want to uh, actually write the syntax, right? So how do you know that you should actually use indentation, right? You should always use indentation when the preceding line, right? So what is the preceding line in this case? uh, this line, the line above print statement, is the preceding line, right? If it ends with a colon, then the following line, which is print statement, needs to start with an index or indentation, and that is the guiding rule, right? So I hope this is clear for you
Okay.
guys, but
Yeah. Yeah.
it is going to become more clear when we talk about for loop, if statement, when we define our custom functions. This is going to become more clear to you guys, right? So
Okay.
for now, what I'm doing is I'm just enhancing it to a little further, and what is now happening is for all the values between 0 and 5, the print statement is executing. So 0 to 5, when I say all the values between 0 and 5, 0 is included but 5 is not included. So 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4, this loop is executing 5 times, and every time it is printing the value of I. If I move print back to the leftmost side, this is going to give me an error, right? And every time when you get an error in Python, guys, you don't have to get scared. Actually, the error message, right, which shows up here, if you read this, uh, it is going to actually give you a very good indication of what it actually is the problem. And you reading through this and interpreting this correctly, you can actually correct this error, right? So I exactly know what is the problem that I have here, something that I need to correct, because I made this deliberately, right? I removed the indentation, and that is what the error message is saying. Expected a indented block, right? So I pressed tab, and then this works fine, right? So moving on, guys, this is a very simple concept, right? Just to give you a feeler of how to write the syntaxes in syntax. Now let's get to how do we provide comments in Python. Now for any programming,
Uh,
yeah,
Hey Manish, sorry to disturb.
yeah,
Can you please pardon since last whatever you have said in last 5 minutes? Actually, my connection has lost it.
sorry, say that again.
Can you please pardon what you have done in last 2 3 minutes?
Okay,
My connection has lost it.
okay, all right. So, Gajendra, the only thing that I did is I was actually showing by trying to remove the indentation from print statement, that how it is going to give you an error, right? So I removed that and it gave me an error. Expected an indented block. Why it is in
Okay.
expecting an indented block? Because if you look at the preceding line, it ends with a colon. And everywhere in Python, you find this line where the syntax requires you to write colon at the end of the line. The next line should be indented. If you do not do that, then this is going to lead you into syntax error and the code is going to give you some kind of an error. It is not going to execute. So this is what I showed. When I corrected this, it ran successfully,
Yeah. Okay.
right?
Thanks.
Okay, so moving on to comments in Python, right? So comments are an integral part of any programming language, right? Why do we have comments in any programming language? Is, let's say if you write some piece of code, right? Then this piece of code will not have only logic or the logic, the business logic, but then it will also have the syntax of the programming language, right? Now, in ideally, what happens is in the real world, not a single person works on any specific programming piece, right? Or a piece of or a program file, right? Many people collaborate their work, and actually any outcome which is an application which is developed by any uh, du- by the company, right? More than one people collaborate, right? And work on that. So, how can someone who is working on a project collaborate their work with others? Let's say if I write a programming, some lines of program code, right, in a file, right? How can someone else understand what is it that I'm trying to do there? Now, in those cases, comments come in handy, right? So what I can do is I can comment my code so that others who are required to work on the same program file are able to actually understand what is it that I have tried to do prior to he or she starts working on that file, right? So this is where comments are required, right? So how do you write a comment? The only thing that you need to do is if you prefix any line in Python with a hash character, then the whole line becomes a comment. Now, what does it mean? When this line becomes a comment, then this is not a line of code which your interpreter is going to interpret. This is not a syntax that the interpreter is going to execute. It is just going to skip it. It is only for documentation purposes, right? So what we can do to make it more meaningful here is this is a command to print something. So when I write this, then it becomes very clear that uh, I've specified that the next line is printing something, right? It could be anything. It could be hello world. It could be whatever you want to print. But then if I read through this line, then I know what is happening in the next set of lines, right? If I'm executing this block of code, right? Let's see what happens. So when I executed this block of code, it only printed hello world. It did not do anything because this line is commented out. But if I, let's say, remove this hash character, right? I'm removing this. Then this line also becomes a command, right? Or executable code, which the Python interpreter is going to try to interpret, right? And let's see what happens if I do not specify this as a command, right? Or as a comment. So is this a valid Python command or any function or any line of code that you think is going to successfully execute?
No.
This is not, right? This is just a plain simple English sentence, right? So when I run this, see what has happened. This is a command to print something, line one. It says invalid syntax. So why is it invalid syntax? Because of course this is a plain simple English text, right? And uh, this is not any valid statement that Python understands. main purpose was to actually put this as a comment, and we can do that by specifying a hash character. So once I do that, then this line is going to get ignored. This is just my comment, and then hello world gets printed. So it is very simple, guys, and this is a very good practice actually. Whenever you write, a few lines of code, you should always, on top of the set of codes or the business logic that you build, specify comments. And this is how you do this. So moving on, what you can also do is it is not entirely necessary for you to actually put in your comment as a separate line, right? You can also specify the comment at the end of any syntax. So what happens is when Python interpreter encounters a hash character, then it ignores anything after it encounters hash on that line till the end of the line. So that is why you are also allowed to specify the comment at the end of the line, right? So in this case, what is going to happen is Python interpreter is going to start interpreting from here, and this is going to get executed. The moment it encounters a hash character, then this is going to just ignore this, thinking that this is a comment for uh, for the rest of the users to know. So this is also fine. When I run this, this is going to print hello world, and there's no problem in that. So there are two ways which we learned. We can comment. We can comment in a separate line. We can comment on the same line after the code is written. There's a third way of commenting as well, and this is called as multi-line comment, right? What if you want to write a few lines, right? Not just one line is required for you to comment, right? What if you want to write multiple lines? So in that case, you can do two things, right? The first one is you can in front of each of the lines, right, specify hash. You can specify hash, and you can specify hash for whatever number of lines you have, and all of these three lines become a multi-line comment. That is one way. The other way is you can specify a multi-line comment inside these two blocks, right? What are these? These are double quotes. So I'm just removing it for now. These are three double quotes. Yeah. So these are three double quotes. So once you specify a plain English like text within starting with three double quotes and ending with three double quotes, anything which comes in between becomes a multi-line comment. And if you see here, there is no hash character in here, right? Before the at the start of the sentence or at the start of the line, you do not have any hash character. So uh, all of this becomes your multi-line comment, and that is another way in which you can actually write your comments. So what we have seen so far in comments is we can specify a single line comment via two ways: either specify it in a separate line, or you can specify at the end of the code, that on the same line. These are two ways. And in case of multi-line comment, either you start all of these lines with hash character, that's one way, or you can actually, if you do not want to start all the three lines or whatever number of lines you are working on for comments with hashes to start with, then you can specify three double quotes at the beginning, and you can specify three double quotes at the end of it. And once you do that, then you will have a multi-line comment in your code. Do let me know if you have any questions. Otherwise, we'll move to the next topic, which is variables.
I'm good.
No questions.
Okay, all right. Fairly a simple topic, guys, but then it is important to write comments. So, all right. So glad. Let's see what variables are in Python or in any programming language. So what happens is when you write your code in any programming language, then one thing which is very important for you to is define variables, right? Now we'll need to see what variables are and what are they used for. So variables like the way they are defined is they're containers for storing data values, right? So let me first show you a little demonstration of what it is, and then we'll come back to this Python notebook. Can you guys see the whiteboard right now?
Yes.
Okay, all right. So, uh, okay, all right. So we all know what a primary memory is, right? Something that we call as RAM, right? So I'm assuming that you all know, right? So what is our primary memory, right? The RAM that we have in our computers, right? So let's say this is our primary memory, right? And it could be, let's say, 4 GB in size, right? So this is a primary memory, 4 GB in size, right? Now what it will be consisting of, right? It will be consisting of small blocks of predefined size, right? Which we can use to store values. This is my primary memory. This is my RAM, random access memory. I'm sure you must have all heard about it. So this is my RAM, and if it is 4 GB, then it is divided into small blocks of fixed size, right? So what we can do is, and I'm just going to skip it till here, right? So this is going to be of same size. So if I look at any of these blocks, right? Let's say this block, right? It could be maybe 2 bytes. This one is also 2 bytes, right? And this is how it is divided. The size could be different, but we're just taking an example, right? So this is 2 bytes. This is 2 byte. What we can do, right? In this 2 bytes of space, right? This one, right? Let me change the pen color. So in this one, what we can do is we can store a value. How we can store a value? We can define a variable. Let's say we can define a variable named x, right? And when you say x is equal to 10, what is happening is you're actually using a memory location to store this value 10. This is what we are doing. And this space in memory, in primary memory, is what you are referring to as x. That is what is happening. And the same way you can do this with other variables as well, right? So let's say there is another variable and you call it name, right? There's another variable and you call it name, and name is equal to, let's say, uh, you specify a text and you say Python. So what is happening here? What you're trying to do is, this is your variable name, right? So this variable name will refer to a memory location, right? And it could be any memory location which is free, and this value is going to get stored in this memory location. So whenever you refer to name, anything which is stored here is going to get called for. Or it could be, when you assign the value Python to this variable called name, then actually what is happening is, in this memory location you are storing this value, which is a string value, which is appearing as Python. When you call it, when you print it, right? When you print it, right? Let's say you write print name. So what is going to happen? This value which is stored here is going to get called, and this is how Python prints whatever values there in the name, right? So I hope this kind of gives you some kind of a clarity on what a variable is and how actually this works uh, with your RAM, right? So let me get back to the Python notebook here, and now this is going to make more sense for you. So whenever you need to store any value, right? Now this value is not going to get stored permanently, right? This is only going to uh, stay till the time this program code executes, and this is how it is going to be. Variables are values which you store on the primary memory, right? So in this example, what we were trying to do is we took an example of primary memory, right? This is my RAM. Whatever we store on RAM is going to not be permanent, right? And this is what we all know. So what are the things that we can use to store on RAM, right? Things that a program code requires only for the duration of your program execution and not later on is are the things that we can store on RAM, right? And variables are one such example. So what we are doing here is we are defining a variable named x and we are specifying a value 10 to this, right? And what is happening here? It is exactly the same as what we did here, right? In the primary memory, a memory location is designated for this variable x, and this value 10 is actually stored in this location. And this is what is happening. Every time now onwards, whenever you refer to x, this is going to call the value from this memory location, and that is what is going to happen. So what we are doing here, we are doing two things. We are defining x is equal to 10 and we are defining y is equal to Python is fun, right? Let's. You must be wondering as to why 10 is written as 10, but Python is fun is written inside double quotes, right? When you look at Python is fun, it is enclosed within two double quotes, right? Why is that? So, so this is the way we write any text inside Python. Text inside Python needs to be enclosed within either a single quotes or double quotes. The choice is yours. You can do you can do either. So I'll give you another example of how we can write the same syntax using single quotes as well. So both of these are allowed, right? I can write single quotes, I can write double quotes, but your string needs to be defined inside quotes. So since I already showed you how the memory allocation and retrieval from memory works, I think this statement will now make sense to you. What we are doing is we are defining a variable named x, and since we are specifying a value 10 to it, this is a numerical variable, and we will see the different variable types moving on. But then this is a numerical variable, right? We are defining x to store numbers in this, and then we are defining y to store a text value to it, which is Python is fun, triple exclamation mark, and we are also specifying z Python is fun uh, with single quotes, right? So what is going to happen when we print these variables, right? Anything which is already assigned to these variables are going to get printed, right? So this is a no-brainer. This is going to print the same variables in the order. So first it printed the value of x, which is 10. Then it printed the value of y. We had stored Python is fun in this, so it gets printed. In z, we had stored Python is fun, and this is what it is printing. So variables are nothing but memory locations where we can actually store values, and then the purpose for us to store these values is to retrieve them back, and that is what we are trying to do. All right, so moving on, guys, there are a few rules, right? This is the value and this is the variable name. And there are a few rules of how we can actually name the variables, right? And this is what we are going to look at right now. So a variable name should be short, right? And it should be self-explanatory. So you should name your variables as so that anybody who is actually looking at your code understands what is the meaning of or what is being stored in those variables, right? And one meaningful way would be, let's say, course name is equal to Python hands-on for working professionals. So what have I done, right? I've stored this value Python hands-on for working professionals, and I have defined my variable as course name. Now, is it more meaningful to define it this way or to define the same variable as x is equal to Python for Python hands-on for working professionals. If both are syntactically correct and this is going to work for me, but if I define my variables like this, then this is going to be more meaningful for anybody to interpret this, right? This is also fine. There is absolutely no issue with that. When I print course name, then this is going to definitely print the course name, which is stored inside this variable. So this is what the first line actually is suggesting. The name should be short, of course, and it should be descriptive enough, right? There are a few other rules as well. Variable name must start with either a letter or a underscore. It cannot start with a number. So I have a few examples that I'm going to just show you of what you can do and what you cannot do while naming variables, and these are the ones which you should comply with. Uh, a variable name can only contain alphanumeric characters and underscores, right? It cannot contain special characters. And then the other thing is variable names are case sensitive, right? So age, where all the three letters are small, and age, where A is capital, and another value and another variable name for age where all the letters are in capitals. These are all going to be treated as different variables. So variable names in Python are case sensitive. That is what it means. So we have already seen example of a meaningful or a descriptive variable name. Let's see some of the valid variable names, right? So what does the rule say? It should start with either a character or underscore, right? So this is what we are trying to do. All my valid variable names are either starting with a character or a underscore. We are not starting the variable names with any number or a special character. So all of these are valid. I will not print the respective values of it, but I'm just executing this line of code to show you that it did not give me any error, right? It did not give me any error. Let me print this, no error, right? So it printed no error, which means all of these lines executed successfully, and this one also executed successfully, and there was absolutely no error in this. So, all right, these are all valid ones, right? Now, how can we make these invalid ones, right? So the first one is you should not start it with a number. So we started a variable with a number, and this is what is going to happen here. It is not going to give you, it is not going to execute correctly. This is going to give you an error. The other one is spaces is not allowed. Spaces are not allowed. Rather, you can specify, underscore character, but you cannot specify a space character. So why is this invalid? Because it starts with a number. Why is this invalid? Is because it has a dash character, which is not allowed. This is a special character, right? The only special character which is allowed is underscore. And here we have a space, right? And this is also not allowed. So all of these are invalid. If I execute this is not going to work, right? And it is giving me an error in the first line itself, and it says invalid syntax. So that is what the purpose of this line of code was, to show you that if you name your variables uh, without following these rules, then you are going to get a syntax error. So all of these are rules that you should keep in mind before naming variables. In short, if you name your variables with only characters, then you'll be always good, right? You do not necessarily need to include an underscore or any special characters or numbers. That is not mandatory. So with this, guys, do let me know if you have any questions. Otherwise, we'll move on to the next topic, which is data types.
No questions. Yeah.
I'm good with it.
All right,
Yeah. How about you?
perfect. Perfect. I'm glad that you guys are following along, and we can move quickly here. So Python has the following data types, right? Built in by default, and these are the categories, right? So there's something called as text type, where we can define strings. Then there are numeric data types, right? There are three numeric data types: int, integer; float is the decimal values; and complex is something that we will see as, this is not something which is supported in every language, but Python does support complex numbers representation as well, and we are going to see this. So in terms of categories, we have text type, numerical type, then we have Boolean type. We will see how we can store true and false values. Then we have sequence types. We will see how we can actually store a list, a tuple, and a range. And don't worry, guys, this is just introduction for list, tuple, and range. We got to see list, tuple, dictionary, and the rest of the data structures which are there in Python in much detail later on as prescribed in the syllabus. So this is just introduction as to how we can define a list, a tuple, and range, and dictionary, and then we will move on, because right now we are just doing introduction of all the data types. We are not looking at how to use them, or how to manipulate them. One last data type is set, and we will see how to define a set. So let's start, right? Let's start with the first one, which is str, string, and we will see, go down the list that ways. So the first one is, of course, we have seen how to define the variable. It's just that we are trying to now figure out what type of variables we can define, right? In terms of memory allocation and all, this is going to work the same way, like we explained earlier, right? So what can happen is, if you're defining a integer variable, right, then this memory location could store an int number, and this memory location, which is really next to it, could store an string. And the third one, this one, let me space this out a little, could store a list. So this is how it could be. You really do not know where your values are being stored in the primary memory, and that is not something that should concern you at all. But then what I'm trying to help you understand is, all of these memory locations inside the RAM, they may not be storing the same data type. This is int in our example, this is string in our example, and this is a list in our example, and this is totally fine. This is how it works, and we should have no problem with that. So let's get started with how to define a string. I think I already covered this like moments ago. There are two ways you can define a string, right? You need to write a text and enclose them in double quotes. So start with double quotes, end with double quotes, and when you do that, then you have actually defined a string. Or you can say that this variable belongs to a data type named string, right? You can also enclose this into single quotes. The preference is yours. Some people prefer double quotes, some people prefer single quotes, and you can do fine with either. Now, I told you that when you define a text, or when you store a text in a variable and enclose it inside double quotes or single quotes, then it becomes a string data type. Now, how can you be sure about that, right? So there's a function in Python which is called type, and you can actually use this to know the data type of any variable. So x is a variable, right? And we entered a string in there. What we can do is, let me make this a little simple. When we print the value of x, when you print x, it prints the value of x. But when you print type of x, then it prints the data type of x, right? And I hope you guys are getting the difference correctly, right? When you want to print the value of the variable, then you put this variable inside print statement. And when you want to know what data type it is, then you put that variable inside this function named type. And when you do that, then it is saying str, and this is what actually it is. So we learned another new function, type, which is used to actually look at or figure out the data type of any variable. So this was the example of string. Let's look at a few numeric data items as well, right? So I have again defined a variable named y, put in a value 20 in there, and then I can do two things, right? I can print y, and I can also do type of y, right? What this is going to do is, it is first going to print the value of y, and then the data type of y. So 20 and int, right? Same ways, what we can do is, z is equal to 12.5, print the value of z, and print, or we can simply write type of z. So what is happening here is we are storing a value 12.5, which is containing decimal values as well, into this variable named z, and then we are printing the value of z, and as well as we are printing the data type of z, right? So the moment, look at the difference here, right? This number did not have a decimal number, so the data type became int. But then the moment we stored a decimal value or a floating value inside a variable, the data type itself became float. And these are the data types which relate to numeric one, right? Int and float. Let's look at the next one, which is complex, right? The concept is not complex. The name of the data type is complex, right? So let's see what it is. Uh, so you must have already, learned in your, mathematics classes earlier, and this is, I think, around class seventh or eighth. A complex number concept, right? A complex number is nothing but square root of -1, and we represent that as j, right? So j is nothing but j is equal to square root of -1, right? And we can represent any complex number as, let's say, 1 plus 2j is one example of a complex number. We can also specify this as, let's say, 5 plus 3j. This could be another example, right? So this is a complex number. This is a complex number. And j in this case, whatever we are specifying here, is equal to square root of -1. So this is how we represent a complex number. Just to give you guys a refresher, these two are examples of a complex number. Python supports a variable type which is called complex, and you can actually specify a parameter called j, and you can store a complex number inside Python variables. So what is it that we're trying to do here? X is equal to 5 plus 3j, print the value of x, and actually this is printing 5 plus 3j uh, as a complex number. Interesting would be to look at what is the type of x, and look at it, right? It says it's a complex number. We can change these two parameters, and if you want to look at this, you know uh, you can read more about what a complex number is and then how it is represented. But then Python supports you to actually work with complex numbers very easily. There is a data type
So
for
do
this.
we? I have a question.
Yeah.
Do we need to give only j value or anything we can write there?
No,
7j, 5i, 6i, 7x, like that. 1 plus 6i, 1 plus
no, so you cannot
like.
specify, I, and the reason is that the notation for this is j itself. You cannot
Okay.
specify, yeah, you cannot specify a I. So, you can specify anything in here. You can specify anything in here. It could be any operator of your choice, but this notation is fixed. This notation is got to be I. You cannot specify, is got to be J. Sorry, this cannot be I or any other character.
Okay.
Yeah,
Whenever you print, no, when you print this complex number, it was showing in curly brackets. I
yeah.
know the reason.
No, so there is no specific reason for this. It is just to enclose this, so that it becomes a single entity, right? So if you look at this number, right, I plus 7j, whatever is the output of this expression, the value of that expression is the complex number. 1 plus 7j is not the complex number. Whatever the outcome of this expression is what the complex number is going to be. By enclosing this into brackets, what Python is trying to suggest is that whatever comes out of this expression 1 plus 7j is the value of this expression, or this complex number. The number 1 plus 7j in itself, or any component of it in itself, is not the complex number. So it's just to represent this. uh,
Okay. Yeah.
this quote, in his as such, does not necessarily mean anything to you. It does not mean negative or whatsoever. because this is just one way of showing it, right? Later on you will find that Python uses uh, many other types of notations, right, to specify these data items. So it uses different notations for complex number, it uses different notations for lists, tuples, dictionaries, and that is what we are going to show, right? So this is just one way of showing you that this is a complex number, right? You can always rely on type. This is what is going to give you the exact data type.
Okay.
So with this, we have covered the three numeric data types, right? Which is int. We have covered float, and we have covered complex, right? This is not very widely used unless and until you're working on a problem which requires you to work with complex numbers, uh, right? So you don't have to worry much about complex numbers, but then just know that there's a data type which exists. So moving on to list, right? What are we trying to do here? We are trying to move to sequence types, right? So we are trying to look at list, tuple, and range. So let's look at list. Mm, yeah, so this is a list, right? Now, back to you when you asked, right? Why is a complex number, you know, inside brackets, right? And then there are different notations which it follows. Uh, for list, it follows a different notation altogether. List contains, multiple items where you can store them together, but the notation here is that you need to specify all of these items that you store inside a list inside the big brackets, right? So what is getting stored in this list? We are storing apple, banana, and cherry. These are the three items in this list, and if you look at them, these are string values, right? Apple is a string, banana is a string, cherry is a string, and the list of and the three string values, apple, banana, and cherry. A collection of all these three is stored as a
List.
list inside this variable named x. So when you print the value of x, let's say, then you look at it, now apple, banana, and cherry are getting printed, but then they're not printed as if you are printing a text, right? It is not getting printed as how your hello world was getting printed. It is getting printed inside single quotes, which means it is text, of course, and then all the three strings, they are getting printed inside a big brackets, right? What does it mean?
Square bracket. Yeah.
Yeah, square brackets. So what does it mean? It means that x is a list, because Python follows this notation for list. How can we know this for sure? Let's find out. So every time type is going to rescue you if you're not able to figure out what is the data type, you can just specify the variable name inside type function, and it is going to show you the data type, right? So it says list. Look how smartly Python also has a preference, right? Python says, okay, you specified apple inside double quotes, but I'm going to prefer showing this as single quotes, right? And this is totally fine. You could have specified single quotes or double quotes, does not really matter. It still is text. So this is how you define a list, right? And list is nothing but, you can say, it's a collection of items. That is it. There are many ways you can define a list, right? And list does not necessarily need to be of the same data type. It could be of different data types as well, right? So what I could do is, this is um, a list which consists of text and a number, and 20.25. Let me separate this out so that it becomes a little readable, and 3 minus 2j. So look at this, what has happened now. So I've printed the value of x, and it is showing up inside big brackets, right? So it definitely means it's a list. But then what kind of a list it is? It is a list where the first item is a string, The second item is an int number, integer number. The third item is a floating number, and the fifth item, sorry, the fourth item is a complex number. So this is also possible. In our earlier example, which is this one, right? All the items of the list were having the same data type, but this is not mandatory. You can create a list, whichever way we want, right? So think of this as a basket, right? You can put either all strings in this, or you can put in values of any specific data type in this as well. It is totally fine. And when you print the type of it, this is going to be very interesting. It says list, right?
So if you not ended with the double quotes also, it will get executed. Correct?
Which is not getting execute. Where should you specify double quotes? Sorry, say that again.
In the list, actually, you have not mentioned the double quotes, right? In between the double quotes. See,
Um,
combination of multiple data types.
yes, yeah. So think of it this way, right? If I specify 10 inside
No,
uh,
no,
that.
not about that. I
Mhm.
was talking about starting and ending. You have at starting you gave the double quotes. At ending you didn't end it with the double quotes. Still it was executed.
Where? So for apple, which is a string, I've specified double quotes at the start as well as at the end, right?
Okay, 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 okay.
Yeah, and this is a int, right? So integer, we do not
Okay.
specify integer with a
Correct.
double quotes now.
Got it, got it.
Float is also not specified in double quotes, and complex number is also not specified in double quotes, right? But if I
Hey,
if
Yeah,
I
Manish.
if I do this, then then this 10 will be stored as a
string.
string, right? It will not
Yeah,
get stored as a number.
correct.
Yeah, someone is saying something.
Yeah, Manish, just a quick question. So, like in the list, we are separating items by the comma separated. So, is there any way that we can change the separator?
No, no, this is part of the syntax. You cannot change
Okay.
the, yeah, this is part of the syntax, and you cannot use uh, any other alternate separator. Yeah, this is pretty
It
much
always
standard.
uses
Yeah.
comma. Okay.
Yeah, right. So let's do a few other thing, right? And this is what will interest you even further is so far when we printed the type of X, we all knew that since X has all of these elements, right, stored as list, this was going to show you list, and this is totally fine. But what if I print X of 0,
0. I think.
right?
Yeah, then it will give you the character list of characters which is placed
Right.
at the zero place.
So what is happening here, right? Why did it change from list to str?
It will show the apple now. Yeah. Correct.
So let me do one thing. Let me put this inside a print statement, and let me also put this inside a print statement. So see what is happening right now. The first print statement is printing the list. The second print statement is printing the type of X. So type of X is list, right? But the third statement, which is type of X, and under brackets I've specified 0. So X of 0 is what?
Apple.
Apple.
It's nothing but
So what is the type of apple?
string.
String. And this is what is happening right now. So let me
Yes.
do one thing to make it a little clear.
So starting value is considering it as 0, and later
Yes,
next one is 1, 2, 3, like that.
yes. So I'll just show you. Wait, I'll just show you. Look at it. So when I print X, the whole list gets printed, right?
Yes.
But when I'm printing X of 0, then it is printing the first element inside this list, which is apple. Clear?
Correct.
Okay.
So how do we refer to any specific item from the list, right? We can specify X0, it will give you apple. We can specify X1, that will give you 10. We can
Yes.
specify X2
2.
and 3. It will start with 0, and this is how indexes start in Python. So I'm just going to do What should be my index, right? Number when I want to print the complex number. Can anyone tell me?
X4, X
Three.
of X
So
of
three.
0, 1, 2,
Three.
X of 3.
Yeah, so this is the fourth element, but then indexes start in Python from 0. So 0, 1, 2, and 3, right? So if I specify 3 here and type of 3, then look at it, what is happening here, right? So x of 0 was printing me apple and string, and now x of 3 is printing me 3 minus 2j and complex, right? So this is how we can define a list, and then further inside the list we can refer to the elements inside the list by specifying this part of the syntax. Clear?
Okay. Yes.
Yeah. So
Yes.
again, guys, like I said, this is just the beginning. List is very much vast, which we are going to cover as a separate topic when we do lists, right? And then we have a separate
List
topic
and tuple.
mentioned, yeah, inside data structures. We are going to see list manipulation in much detail, right? List, tuples, sets, and dictionaries. This is just what we are trying to do. We are just trying to get a idea of what different data types are supported in Python. So this is just a glimpse. Um, okay, so moving on, we have a similar data structure which is called as tuple, right? And the way a tuple works is very similar to a list, but then there is a small difference between a list and a tuple, and that is what we are going to see right now. So
Okay.
again, we are doing the same thing here, but then what is the difference in syntax?
Denoted in curly brackets. It was,
Yes. So this is
yeah.
small brackets, right? Not the curly brackets. Curly brackets is for dictionaries. We will see it later.
Oh, sorry. Yeah.
Yeah. So now if you look at it, right, we have the almost the same syntax, right? The one that we had written for list, right? But then here, instead of the big brackets, we have the small brackets, right? So what happens is, let me quickly copy paste the code and show you what is happening here, right? So it says again the same thing, right? But then now it is printed inside small brackets, and it says it's a tuple, right? So it's a tuple, right? It's not a list. And this is clear because we have defined this as a tuple by specifying this or enclosing this inside single brackets. So the first difference that you should get is a tuple is, when you need to define a tuple, you need to enclose the list of elements inside small brackets and not big brackets, right? The other difference between a tuple and a list is you can always extend the list, right? So right now the list is composed of four items, right? What if I want to add a, a fourth or a fifth element, right, inside this tuple? Sorry, inside this list. Can we do that? Yes, we can do that. But then is that possible inside a tuple? No. Once a tuple is defined, uh, this is not possible for you to actually override this tuple. This is kind of a read-only list. You can think of tuple as a read-only list. This is also a list, right? But then once you have defined this, going forward, you cannot manipulate this. So that is one of the difference, right? Uh, that you will see. So we will look at it actually later when we will try to actually add an element to this, right? This is not something which is possible inside a tuple, but inside a list we can add elements further. So for now, since we are only looking at the data type, let's not, get into a lot of detail here. What you should actually know by now is that a list is mutable. And when I say mutable, actually we can add elements to the list. We can remove elements from the list. But a tuple it is called non-mutable. A tuple is non-mutable, and this is the only difference between a list and a tuple. So tuple is basically, if you look at it, a tuple is nothing but a read-only list, right? A tuple is nothing but a read-only list, and that is what it is. In terms of functionality, it works exactly the same. If you want to, let's say, print the second element, right? We don't have a fourth element, third element, so we can specify number 2 here, and it is printing cherry and class string. The way you defined, you were able to define a list with data types of, different data types, values of different data types. You can do that the same way in tuple as well. So that is what it is for tuple, guys. Let's look at range now. So range is, a data type which actually, as the name suggests, stores value between a range, right? So when you say range 6, then it is by default going to start with 6. And when you print the value, then it says it is a range between 0 and 6. Now 6 is not going to be included, and this is how it works in Python. And then there are a few ways of actually defining this. Uh, a range, right? You can specify the range as 6. You can also specify value, starting value. And when you do that, then see, here we did not specify any starting value, but now we are specifying a starting value. So this range is now defined as 1 to 6, but since 6 is omitted, it is only a range from 1 to 5. And how it is omitted is something which will become very clear when we use this range inside the for loop. In fact, we saw this example today as well, right? We have seen this. Let me show you. Yeah. So range is what we used here briefly, right? We will look at it more in more detail when we do our for loops. But then when we used for I in range 0 to 5, then this range 0 to 5 would mean 0 to 4. And when we are printing the value of I inside this loop, it is actually printing 0 to 4. So this becomes very clear here that the value here is omitted, right? 0 to 5 would mean 0 to 4. And this is how Python works. So we just need to know that the ending value is always omitted, right? And that is what is happen that will happen if you use this inside a for loop. The other thing which we can actually do is we can also specify a third parameter. So let's say 1 to 10 and specify a third parameter. Now this parameter number 2 is going to be the step size, right? So right now, when we did not specify any step size, the step size was 1, right? It is going to move from 1 to 6, taking one step at a time, which means it will move from 1 to 2, 2 to 3, 3 to 4, 4 to 5, and 5 to 6. But when we specify a step size of 2, then this is going to add 2 each time, right? So it will start from 1, then move to 3, 5, 7, and 9. And this is how it will move forward. So of course, this is not going to be any meaningful here, because what is happening right now is it is just defining a range. When we use this inside a for loop, then it will become more meaningful, right? So let me do one thing. Let me use a little for loop here for I in X, and let me print the value of I. So see what is happening here. It is first printing 1, 3, 5, 7, and 9. Why is that happening? Because in X, we are specifying the range as start from 1, end at 10, and increment the value by 2. So it will start at 1, and then it will move to 3, it will move to 5, it will move to 7, and it will move to 9. And this is what is going to get printed here: 1, 3, 5, 7, and 9. So think of this as this way, right? So you have this number line here, you have this number line. This is your 1, 2. In fact, you also have a 0 here. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10, right? So in this case, what is happening is inside range, we can actually specify three parameters, right? The first one is the start number. The second one is the end number. And the third one is, sorry guys, my mouse is not working very correctly. I need to calibrate it, which I'll do after the session. So it should not be a problem next time onwards. The step size, right? So this is the first parameter, this is the second parameter, and this is the third parameter. So let's say in range, what are the values that we specified? We specified 1, 10, and 2, right? So this is my first parameter 1, this is my second parameter 10, and this is my third parameter 2, right? So what is going to happen? It is going to start from here. It is going to start from here. It is going to take a step size of 2. So next time it hops on, it will reach here. Next time it hops on, it is going to reach here. Next time it hops on, this is going to reach here. Likewise. And we have a hard stop at 10, right? Which means it cannot go beyond 10. It cannot go beyond this point. So next time it will try to hop, it will try to reach number 11, but we have to stop at 10. So this is not going to happen, right? Which means it will start from here and move till here, and this is where it will end. Clear? And that is what is happening. It is printing these values 1, then 3, then 5, then 7, and then 9, and not moving beyond that. So this is what is happening here. Do let me know if you guys have any questions to ask for range.
Can we pass string range? I mean, like the ABCD following that.
Sorry, say that again.
Like, can we pass range as in a string or type?
Can you do what? Can you pass string?
Yeah.
So what happens in this case is, a range always works with numbers, right? It does not work with strings. It always works with because the parameters are such that you need to specify the start number from where you want to start, you where would you want to stop, and the step size, and then the range that we have just looked at is primarily used with numbers. It does not work with text. Is that what your question was?
Yeah. So,
Yeah,
like, if I need to print out for A to Z for alphabets, so can we pass that kind of range?
no, so it will not work with alphabets because there is no use case for it, right? Range is used to actually feed the loops, right? How do you want your for loop or while loop to work?
Right.
Where do you want to start? How do you want to step? You want to step one at a time, two at a time, three at a time, and then where do you want to end? So it is mostly used to define a loop, and then a loop primarily is fed using a number line. It can also be fed through a list, which is something which we are going to see, but we cannot specify um, s- strings per se, right? If you want to specify, um, the step size. One thing which you can definitely do is, and let me show you that example. What I can do is, let me use this as an example. So I defined a list, right? I defined a list, and what I can do is for items in X, right? But again, just mind that we are not using range, right? For items
Yeah.
in X, uh, print the value of items. So when we do that, then what is happening is one by one, it is printing the value of each of these items. So it is iterating through the list, specifying apple first inside items, then storing 10 inside items, then storing 20.25 inside items, and then this complex number inside items. And every time it is printing the value of the variable items, and that
item.
is how it is iterating it, right? So to answer your question, yes, you can feed a for loop with any iterable uh, data type, but not primarily, but then you cannot use a range for that, right? I mean, a range
Right.
always works with numbers, to answer your question. Sure. Okay, all right. So moving on, what we can now look at is the
Can
other.
you please can you please run the range of 1 comma 6 once? I have not seen that. Can you please
So
run it?
this one, 1 comma 6.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
So 1 comma 6 is not going to give you anything because right now we're just defining the range, right? When we define the range, then it just defines the range. When this range is going to get used, it will get used when we use it inside a for loop, or a while loop, right? And this is what is happening in case of this example. When we specify 1 to 10, 1 to 10 with a step size of 2, and we are actually using this in the for loop. I
Yeah,
can.
yeah, I have seen that. Except this range of 1 comma 6, I have seen that stuff.
Okay, right. So we're not using it. If you really want, what I can do is I can name is at x1, and I can use it here. And this is going to actually give you, like I said, it starts with 1, but it ends with whatever number you specify, the stop
Fine.
minus 1, right? So it is giving you 1 to 5.
Okay. Okay, got it.
Yeah. So I'll just change it because, right after this session, I'm going to, post this as well so that you guys can run it on your own and look at it. So I'm not changing it anything here. Now the third one, right? We have already seen list and we have seen tuple. The third data type is dictionary, right? So how is it different from a list? The first thing which happens here is we are using a curly brackets notation, and since we are using curly brackets notation, this becomes a dictionary, right? Now there is something peculiar about this, right? If you look at it, we don't have only commas in here. We also have semicolons in here, right? So it says name John, age 36. So
So we have got key values, right?
yes, so what happens here is we store key value pairs, right? So you can also think of this as a table, right? Where these are my column names and these are the row values, the values inside the row. So this is my column name, as name, second column as age, and this is my first value of name in the first row,
This
and then the,
map,
sorry,
this map, right?
yes, you can think of it this way, yeah. So when you print the value, this is going to print all of the key value pairs inside the list. You can also print the type of X, and when you do that, then you get a dictionary. DICT is the short for dictionary, and this is what it shows you. So for now, you do not need to actually worry a lot about how to use the dictionary and all, because like I said, we are going to cover this in much detail. The implication and then the usage of a dictionary is too vast. What we are trying to do is define or figure out a way how to actually define the dictionary, right? And this is what we are trying to do. So that is what it is. For dictionaries for now. You don't have to worry about anything other than this. One thing that I would definitely want to do is I could actually show you something.
Here, one more thing, Manish.
Yeah,
The step size is incremental, right?
yeah, incremental, yes.
Not the decremental.
You can do that as well. And I will quickly show you one example for that as well. So right now, this is 1 to 10, followed by a step size of 2, right? If you want to reverse the order, you can do that as well. So you can start from 10, you can end at 0, and you can specify a step size of -2, or let's say -3 in that case. You can do that as well. So in this case, what is going to happen is it will start from 10, it will end at 0, which means it will need to go in the opposite direction towards the left side, right? In this case, it will need to start from here, right? Go in this direction, end here, and it will need to take 3 steps at a time. So 1 step, 2 steps, 3 steps. So when you visualize this on a number line, it becomes very easy for you to actually interpret this. So the line that I've just written, the parameters are 10, 0, and -3. So this needs to be logically correct. Otherwise, you'll encounter a infinite loop. So 10, 0, and -3, right? What do you think this is going to print? We just saw it here. So 10, 7, 4, and 1. Agree?
Yeah.
Yeah. So let's see. Let's see what it does. So 10, 7, 4, and 1. Right? This is what we saw 10, 7, 4, and 1. So this is what it is showing to you. So guys, I mean, glad that you guys are thinking more and asking me these questions, but then do not think that these are not going to get covered. These are just a brief, right? What we are trying to do today is just figuring out and looking at what different data types exist, right? We are definitely going to look at range and all of these data types in more detail as and when required. We are just doing a general discussion today where we are just knowing briefly what these data types are in general, and we'll take these forward as and when we need them. But then in this workbook, all of these are getting captured, and right after the session, like 15 minutes after the session, I'm just going to upload it so that you can actually start working on it. Video will follow a little later, maybe around 2 hours from now, after the end of the class. So we have already done that. Let's not extend this any further for now. And this is what the dictionary is. Actually, this is duplicate, so I'm just going to delete this. The last data type, which is we are going to see today, is Boolean, right? So we all know, there are two possible values for Boolean data type, true and false, and we can actually look at them uh, here, right? So we can actually specify these as true or false. So X can store true, Y can store false. These are easy ways of storing these values, but what we can do is we can also specify these as, let's say, X is equal to um, 5 greater than 3, right? And we can specify Y is equal to uh, 3 is equal to 7. So when we do that, let's print these and see what happens. So there are two ways we can actually store Boolean values. You can either specify the value itself inside the variable, or this could be a result of a logical operation, right? So 5 greater than 3 is a logical operation, right? What we are trying to do here is we are trying to figure out if 5 is greater than 3. Now, what do you think? If 5 is greater than 3 is a logical expression, then will it result in a true or a false?
True.
It
True.
will it will result in a true, right? And what will result in this case? 3 is equal to 7. Is 3 is equal to 7?
False. False.
It's false, right? So
False.
actually, what I should now do is I should change the variable name so that there is no confusion. And now I'm printing the values of x1 and y1. So now this is resulting in a true statement, and true value for the logical operation, and this is resulting into the false value for uh, this is true, and y1 is false. So let me do one thing. Let me separate these out so that there is no confusion. I can put this all here. So the first one is resulting into a true, the second one is resulting into a false. And these are the only two possible values for the Boolean data type.